Thanks for tuning in to Men for the Win, a podcast hosted by David Kufis and Dan Thompson, two avid fans who appreciate well-played baseball, especially when it's done by the Twins. Men for the Win is sponsored by the Grand Group with Edina Realty. Are you looking to purchase a new home in the Twin Cities area? Or perhaps you're trying to sell your current home? Whether you're upsizing or downsizing, the Grand Group with Edina Realty will meet all of your housing needs. Contact the Grand Group by emailing thegrand, G-R-A-N, group at edinarealty.com or call them by phone at 612-817-8751. The Grand Group with Edina Realty, 7-time Minneapolis-St. Paul Magazine Super Agent Award winners. On this episode, David and Dan recap the Twins' 3-game series against the Toronto Blue Jays. Thanks for listening. Enjoy. Thanks for tuning in to Men for the Win. My name is David Kufis. With me, as always, is Dan Thompson. The Twins head north of the border, taking on the Toronto Blue Jays at Rogers Center. And what do you know, Dan? The Twins continue their winning ways, taking their 6th straight series victory, taking 2 of 3 from Toronto.
This might actually be a pretty good baseball team in the end. Now, it's weird because some of the problems they were having earlier are not problems, and it's kind of vice versa, right? Like the bullpen is kind of in shambles other than maybe 2 guys right now. But hey, you keep winning series. That is all we talk about. You have to keep winning series, and look at those standings now.
Yeah, look at that, Dan. Twins are only a half game back from Cleveland for the lead, and then Kansas City is a game back, so they're still keeping it close. But the Tigers are starting to come down to reality. They're 4.5 back. Then the White Sox, Dan, they gave up before the season started. They're still sitting 13 games back.
A couple things happened this weekend. First of all, it's Mother's Day, so happy Mother's Day to all of our listeners who are mothers. We are grateful for all of you. Wouldn't be here without you. Isn't that the joke about Mother's Day, David?
Yeah, that's great, Dan.
Yeah, sorry. And then, so I wanted to talk about the aurora borealis that happened this weekend too.
Oh, Dan, this is how Dan texted it to me, and I'm like, Dan, Dan does have pretentious sentiment in Dan's speaking
what it's
from
called.
time to time.
I don't know what else to call it, David.
Northern Lights, like any normal person would say. Is that how you talk about it with your kids, Dan? If your kids asked you what you were looking at?
I think I want them to know what the real word is. You want to give your kids the right vocabulary to describe the thing that they're looking at.
You're telling me that's how I should explain it to my 4-year-old?
Yeah, aurora borealis. Anyway, what I wanted to say is that, did you see the photo of the sausage, like up there in the sky, like with the aurora behind? I'm sure it's out there. The sausage is everywhere. They brought it up to Canada. They brought it up to the really tall tower in Toronto. The sausage is getting weird.
It looks like the original sausage. I don't think they've switched it out yet.
No, they resurrected it from the trash, and so now they still have it. I don't know. One other thing we need to revisit, Max Kepler's moral failings was kind of a main topic of the last episode. And so I asked to put up a poll on Twitter, and so we did. And I was stunned at how many people said that Max Kepler should just score. I even voted with you, David, just so that it could be balanced out a little bit more and say that he should have stayed at third. I was surprised at the lack of moral fortitude among Twins fans out there, at least on Twitter.
Yeah, I think that there needs to be a little bit of clarification here. Part of the problem is that people are like, well, of course it's within the rules for him to score because the ball is still live. That's not the conversation that we're having. What I'm saying is, morally, the right thing to do for Max Kepler was to stay at third base. And other people are like, well, he probably didn't know what happened, or, you can't stop every play for an injured player. And I agree. There's going to be plays where, again, I even referenced this in the last episode. There's plays where guys aren't going to know that someone is injured. And I'm saying that, yeah, we can't be just willy-nilly stopping time randomly. But in this moment, it was very clear. Max Kepler watched the guy get injured, drop the ball, and then broke for home. And so it's very different than a lot of situations. If you're just looking at this particular situation with an injured player, I think Max should have stayed at third. Again, they lost the game anyway, but I guess in my head and my heart, really, I think that the right thing to do is to stay at third base.
Well, we will see. Maybe people can, you can text the show now. And so maybe you can send a text with your thoughts on this and we can keep this thought alive because I do think it's an interesting thing to talk about. But hey, we have some games to talk about. So let's go into the recap.
Series recap.
Game 1, Dan, this one was a tight one all the way around here. Twins come away with it 3-2, but this was a nail-biter. And I appreciated this, Dan, because we've sort of talked about, okay, the Twins are going to start hitting a schedule here where they're playing real teams, and the Blue Jays are certainly that, Dan. But Joe Ryan came in throwing fire here, 7 innings pitched, 6 hits, 1 earned run, 7 strikeouts, and of course the earned run is on a homer because that's what Joe Ryan does, Dan.
Yeah, the Twins were able to take a lead in the first inning. Now they tried another one. I think teams are getting wise to the double steal here.
It was a very confusing play that didn't work well, and I think because if it was designed, Castro should have left for home a lot earlier than he did. That was part of the problem. Like, he was thrown out by a long ways. Rocco challenged this play also to say that Castro didn't have a lane to home plate, but the way it looked, the catcher was in fair territory. Castro had a lane, and honestly, the ball beat him there by so long, I don't think it was going to be a close play anyway.
Yeah, I think when you're out, you're out. But hey, the Twins were able to add another run in the 5th. Carlos Santana, who had himself a series, we were going to talk about him a lot, hits a solo home run and then gets hit in the head by the rally sausage.
It's so funny. You have to go watch the replay, folks, if you haven't seen this. So I assume it's Jeffers who threw the sausage, but it goes straight up. Santana, no recognition that there's been a sausage thrown in the air, Dan. Like, it's sort of like, if you watch a group of people in the bleachers and you say, heads up, because like a foul ball's coming,
sure,
and there's that one guy who just no reaction whatsoever. Like, that's how Santana was walking to the bench. And so the sausage comes directly on top of his helmet, Dan. It looked like Jeffers was intentionally trying to hit him in the head. It was so perfect.
Well, and because Joe Ryan went 7 innings, those runs were enough, really. Duran comes in actually for the 8th, and then Jax gets his 5th save because Rocco does whatever he wants with the back end of the bullpen here. Though I did like this move, but that allows him to just use his top arms, and they get a key insurance run in the top of the 9th to make it 3-1 at the time. This was a play where, of course, it was Max Kepler getting involved in here, knocking in what ended up being the winning run.
Yeah, so he comes in as a pinch hit, and it's just one of those things, Dan, where when a guy is on a streak like this, he's the guy you want at the plate. Now, Royce Lewis, that's his entire life. You always want Royce Lewis up at the plate for the clutch situations, but Max Kepler has become that guy as of late.
He is the one.
It ends up being important because in the bottom of the 9th, Carlos Santana commits an error, which opens the window for the Blue Jays. Now, it looked like the runner kind of blocked his view, which I think was a good, savvy move. We've seen the Twins do this. Trevor Larnach did this in the White Sox series before the White Sox kind of fell apart in one of those games. But in the end here, the Twins were able to hang on. And of course, it's Griffin Jax getting hit in the behind. That's what it takes for the Twins to win this baseball game.
I was very nervous because it came off hot off the bat, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, they're going to tie it, and then who knows, there's no way the Twins are going to be able to pull this one out. But no, perfectly off of the caboose of Jax to Santana, and then Santana touches first base as if it was a routine play, Dan. It's like they drew it up that way.
Kind of like that play last series where, went off, was it the third baseman, and then it was caught by the shortstop for the Twins.
Off Miranda's glove into Castro's glove.
Well, then there's game 2. The Twins lose this game 10-8. So many moments in this. The Twins look great at the beginning. They have a 7-1 lead in this, and a lot of good really at the beginning of this game. The Twins put up 3 in the top of the first with a 3rd run thanks to Davis Schneider's error in left field. And I love this. Kirilloff hit it to him, and then it kind of scoots past him, and you can see in the replay Schneider's face just sink as he has to turn around and run all the way back to try to go get that baseball.
Yeah, and then top of the 2nd, Twins add another one on a Larnach 2-strike single that scores Santana. And then in bottom of the 2nd, Bichette strikes back here with a home run, making it 4-1 Twins.
And that was really how it went. Like, the Twins would score some runs, but the Blue Jays wouldn't put up a 0. And in the top of the 3rd, Correa walks, Castro doubles, and then Santana hits a home run again. It's a 3-run shot to make it 7-1. Things are looking good, but a couple things here. First off, he was given multiple helmets to kind of guard against the sausage strike that he had in the first one, and I think it sailed right over him. And then later, Eddie Julian tries to score from second and is thrown out. Did you think that this was because of his slide, or the lack of a slide that he was out here, or do you think this is just another instance where he was just beat?
It was weird how he so casually, like, it didn't look like he was even trying to score. It looks like he was jogging to the dugout. Like, he forgot that he was trying to touch home plate because he didn't even break stride down. He kept running, the catcher tagged him, and he just kept jogging onto the dugout. It didn't seem like he put in a lot of effort.
It definitely had the feel of a play where in 10 years ago, he would have just had to plow into the catcher and kind of hope for the best.
Yes.
But in any case, the Jays linger. They score a couple in the bottom of the 3rd on a couple doubles. And then in the top of the 4th, Ryan Jeffers hits a towering home run. It was like the 2nd highest home run of the season in the majors. Makes it 8-3. But then SWR, Simeon Woods Richardson, just can't get through very much of this game. And so he hands the ball over to Sands, Okert, and Jackson. And things don't go well. And over the course of the 5th through the 7th inning, the Blue Jays score 7 unanswered runs. And that was kind of the difference in this one.
Yeah, I mean, the Jays bullpen deserves a lot of credit here. They go 6 innings pitched, no runs, and just 3 hits, no walks. Gaussman, the Twins have his number. It's sort of like the Royals with Bailey Ober in the first start of the season. It felt very much like the Twins are like, yeah, we know how to hit him. Like, it's kind of silly that you guys are putting him on the mound.
And yet things worked out for the Blue Jays. They're, like you mentioned, their bullpen. They also struck out the Twins 12 times, and that was the most times they've struck out since April 24th. Only the second time they've had more than 9 strikeouts over that span. The Twins have been really good at plate discipline here, but it's as if they went up by those 5 runs, and then they were like, you know what, this will be enough. And it's like, guys, have you looked at the bullpen lately?
Well, and I do think that SWR deserves a little bit of defense because he had to sit a long time early in the game between innings. And we've seen Pablo Lopez struggle like that a little bit too. When they have to sit for a long time, it can be hard to get back into your routine and get up there throwing. You love the run support, but it's like, but could you guys do it quicker?
I think that's probably fair. And then a couple Blue Jays lines. Vlad Guerrero was 4 for 5 with 3 RBI. He hit everything hard. Davis Schneider kind of redeemed himself for that error early in the game. He goes 3 for 4 with 2 RBI. It got to the point where by game 3, I mean, I was kind of terrified every time Vlad got up. He was just hitting the ball so well.
He doesn't swing outside of the zone, and when he makes contact, it explodes. He's a guy who you almost think, even with the guy on base, let's go ahead and walk him. You know, there's no reason to risk anything crazy here.
Well, I would argue that game 3, that maybe was what happened to him. Now, the Twins do hang on and win this game 5-1, but it was a tight game. The first 5 innings of this game took just over an hour. Super fast. It was as if they all had Mother's Day plans, and they wanted to get and see these important women in their life rather than play baseball.
But they were wearing pink, Dan. I'm pretty sure that works. That's just as good as being there for Mother's Day dinner.
Right, exactly, yeah. We'll talk more about Bailey Ober's great start here, but he had a 6 1/3 innings, 1 hit, no runs, a career-high 10 strikeouts. His ERA is down to 3.77. Twins, the big hit for them is the top of the 7th. It's who else? Carlos Santana with a 3-run shot to get the Twins on the board. This is the second time this year that he has hit home runs in 3 straight baseball games, and in between, he's got like 2 hits, is what it feels like.
Yeah, and it should be noted, too, Kepler reached on an error. I mean, the Jays had a rough series from the defensive perspective, and the error wasn't close, Dan. It was hit to the third baseman, sort of playing in the shortstop's position, because they're shaded that way with Kepler at the plate, and pretty routine plate, and it wasn't like it took a weird hop. He just straight missed it.
Well, in the bottom of the 7th, then, things get a little bit dicey. So after Bailey Ober gets 1 out, he hands the ball over, and I think it was an understandable call, given he was over 100 pitches at that point. But then Cole Sands came in, and it was as if the plan was to walk Vlad Guerrero. I don't think the plan was to give up a single to the next guy and then hit another guy with the pitch after that to suddenly load the bases.
Well, we're going to talk about Cole Sands in this position to begin with. But so Funderburk comes in, replaces Sands, comes in with the bases loaded, 1 out. He allows a sac fly, which honestly, you have to be willing to take, right? Like no problem on that front. And then he gets a big strikeout to end the inning. I do want to say too, the umpire, when this scorecard comes out, I thought he was fantastic. I should have looked up who was behind the plate, but he was calling a very consistent strike zone. There was never a pitch that I thought, oh man, that shouldn't have been a strike or a ball. And there was one particular pitch when Bailey Ober was in a little bit of a jam and he struck out Bo Bichette. It was like the top right corner of the zone and it was a breaking ball. It was a strike, but also where Vasquez had set up, he had to move his glove to catch it. And so like part of that, I think is why Bichette was like, oh man, that was out of the zone. No, it was a clean pitch, but that ump, Dan, he wasn't going by the framing. He wasn't, he was just very consistent. We got to give credit where credit's due as much as we like to rag on umpires.
And then the Twins get 2 insurance runs in the top of the 8th. We'll talk more about that a little bit later. Funderburk pitches a clean bottom of the 8th. And then Duran pitches a clean 9th. Not a safe situation, but I was still happy to see him come in that spot.
I mean, top of the Blue Jays orders, you got your big boppers coming up. He's the guy you want on the mound in that situation.
All right. Well, David, reluctantly, I'm going to move us in here to Puckett's Picks winner.
Catch 'em all, Kirby Puckett!
Puckett's Picks winner.
Not happy about this. You didn't even have first pick. You had 4th pick, and you're like, I guess I'll take Correa. This is the kind of year you've had.
It's been good, Dan, and I just love it. Carlos Correa, like you said, comes away with the victory for me, 9 points. The listeners took Kepler, who had 6. Hogs took Jeffers, who only had 1 point, and he didn't ever seem like he was at bat. And the one game where he had 4 at bats, he looked bad and he was upset. His last at bat, he struck out and just started cursing out the umpire, even though it was like, there was no problems here. Sorry about that. But then, Dan, you had Julian thinking that the Canadian...
Canada. Yes. Yes, I did. That was why I picked him, David. And it worked. He had a great series. I know he only got 4 points. Sorry. But... Sorry, I was excited to talk about Eddie Julian here.
Great series, maybe. He had 4 points. I don't know that I would qualify that as a Great series, Dan.
But did you see all the hits he had? He had like 4 hits. He had a couple stolen bases. He didn't have a great base running play, as we talked about. But the guy was kind of back to his normal self. I was 1 Eddie Julian home run from winning this thing.
Yeah, but the listeners were 1 Kepler home run from winning this thing. And Hogs was 2 Jeffers home runs from winning this thing.
Well, in any case, nobody gets the bonus point because Carlos Santana had 19, which I couldn't say I saw coming.
No, but he's done that, right? There's been these series where he just goes off. The last time he went off was against the Angels, and he had 18 in that series.
Well, looking at the season standings, David, you now have 6 points, a clear lead over Hogs, who has 4.5. I've got 2.5. The listeners have 2. I mean, you're ahead in points, even 69 to 68 over the listeners. Poor listeners here. They've made some good picks. They're just running into buzzsaws lately. Max Kepler and now Carlos Correa.
It's been a rough go. I mean, they've had some rough bounces, certainly. But I'm happy to be where I am, Dan. With that, let's go on to Beast versus Bench.
Beast versus Bench.
Is losing fun? Is losing fun?
You know, Dan, I don't like to say that I've been wrong, but my views on Carlos Santana have 100% turned around. He will be my beast. He goes 5 for 12 with 7 RBI, including the big 3-run shot and the big 3-run shot in Game 3. I just think, Dan, that Santana, how much damage he's done to the Twins in years previous, I was just expecting that, like, out of the gate when he was with the Twins. But no, he needed some warm-up time. Correa needed some warm-up time too sometimes. You know, that those late March and April games, they're just starting to see the ball again out of these pro MLB pitcher hands. I think that he's locked in now, and he's a guy who I love seeing his at-bats now, Dan, and it's been a full 180 for me on this.
And he's doing a whole lot better than Kirilloff right now. So go figure, now he's the better defensive, and at least at the time, he's the better offensive option at first base. I went with actually a pitcher, and I just couldn't not. And I went with Bailey Ober, who had such a great start in Game 3 when they absolutely had to have it. It was kind of funny because Alek Manoah, this is only his second start of the season. This has been, I mean, he's been a great player. In just a couple years ago, he was a Cy Young finalist. He didn't look great in his first start, but he looked awesome today against the Twins. He pitched 6 clean innings right there with Ober, but Ober was fantastic. Those 10 strikeouts, he was pitching high in the zone. He's pitching confidently. He's using his height. This is a guy, he's got 4 wins now. You can argue he's actually been the Twins' best pitcher. Take away that start against Kansas City, and I know that you can't say that all the time, but that was clearly an outlier.
Something was weird. I know we've said that a whole bunch of times now. There was something weird about that game. They had to be seeing what he was throwing ahead of time. I don't quite understand it, but my goodness, Dan, Hogs predicted that Ober may be the best pitcher on the staff by the end of the season, and he's certainly looking like that now.
Who's on your bench?
Yeah, I got to give it to Martin, Dan. I mean, he's got this opportunity that he thought was taken away from him, and then with the other injuries that have popped up here with Buxton going back on the IL, he comes up and he just hasn't really capitalized.
I am not throwing away my shot.
I do kind of wonder if some of his confidence was shaken in the send down, even though he was performing so well. And now that he's back up, he kind of is like, well, this is only temporary. I shouldn't get too excited. But he goes 0 for 5 in this series. And my big issue here, Dan, is that when he's playing center field, clearly he's not paying attention to the players around him. He's playing dangerously. So Max Kepler was under a fly ball, literally standing there. I don't think Max Kepler moved, Dan. And here comes Austin Martin trying to tackle Max Kepler for whatever reason, like trying to ensure he has a spot on the roster even after Buxton returns. But Max is like, dude, what are you doing? He runs into Max. Max still makes the catch. And then Bailey Ober sitting there on the mound making puppet hands at him saying, hey, you got to talk to each other. Like, I just don't quite understand how a guy who's playing at the major league level is either wearing earplugs or he needs hearing aids, Dan, to hear guys calling him off.
Even Chris Atterbury on the radio cast compared him to a puppy who's just kind of going after every ball thrown out there. I mean, he needs to be more under control. And he probably sees that when Buxton comes back, he's going to be gone. I think he's trying a little bit too hard to make every play. But yeah, you got to be a good teammate as well there. And know that Max Kepler plays a very good right field wherever he is.
I mean, between his calculus, his hidey holes in certain stadiums, Dan, Max Kepler knows exactly what he's doing in right field.
All right, my bench spot is going to go to a pitcher again. Cole Sands had 2 appearances, 4 earned runs. He got 4 outs, and he really threw into disarray games 2 and games 3. Now, the Twins were able to recover game 3, mostly because of Cody Funderburk. But yeah, Cole Sands, and we're going to, I think, talk a little bit more about Cole a little bit later, but he didn't play well. That's the bottom line.
No, well, let's push forward to Rocco's Rewind, because, yeah, I have a couple of thoughts on Cole Sands.
Rocco's Rewind.
So a brief note here in game 1, Duran only threw 9 pitches in the 8th. Like, don't give the 9th to Jackson. Just put Duran back out there. I don't understand exactly why you're so hesitant to do that when at the beginning of the season, Dan, we heard over and over and over and over again how Rocco was going to ask guys to pitch more than 1 inning. Well, if you only threw 9 pitches, that would be a great opportunity for you to throw more than 1 inning. But anyway, back to the Cole Sands piece here. What is Cole Sands doing pitching in Game 3 after the terrible outing in Game 2? Game 3 isn't over yet. Like, Game 3 is still happening. There's still lots of baseball to be played. It's not a blowout and you're not losing. Why is he on the field right now? Especially with Rocco showing so much hesitancy to use a pitcher back-to-back days if he can help it. Why would you put a guy out there who pitched terribly the day before? This honestly felt like Emilio Pagan. Like, that's how it felt to me. Well, you gotta let him get back on the horse. Okay, well, after he's killed every horse in the barn, Dan, it's time to move on. Maybe horse riding isn't for you.
I mean, you have Griffin Jacks there.
Yeah.
He hasn't pitched. There's an off day coming up. You got the heart of the Blue Jays lineup. If you're not going to use Duran in that spot, then surely you can go to Griffin Jacks. They miss Brock Stewart. I think this is a spot that normally we would have seen Brock Stewart. But yes, Cole Sands is a curious pick there. Maybe he's got really great stuff. You know, he's got great metrics, just kind of like they said about Pagan. He's a year away, I guess.
Dan. What do you have for Rocco?
Well, it relates. So in Game 2, I thought Rocco had to let those bullpen guys try because he had burned all of his guys in Game 1, and you got a big lead. So you look at the line. We talked about Sands. Okert comes in and is terrible. And then Jay Jackson comes in and is worse, right, with a couple earned runs. Now Thielbar comes in. He doesn't look good either. It's like nobody could get an out in this spot. But at the same time, like, well, what is Rocco supposed to do in this spot? This made sense to me. Bringing in Josh Stalmont at the end, I guess, was kind of nice cleanup at that point. Maybe they should have brought him in earlier. But the fact that Rocco was managing to win the next game, and then he won the next game, kind of vindicates what he did in Game 2 to me, because they won Game 3 and they won the series.
You had a 7-run lead here, Dan. I don't know that you should really be thinking about managing to win Game 3 here in the middle of Game 2.
Well, but this is how Rocco goes, right? He wants to win the first game, and then he's okay with the second as long as he wins the rubber match in the end. I guess that's his way, and he's really trying to avoid using some guys not named Cole Sands in back-to-back games. And so I like that, because we have seen with guys in the past, Taylor Rogers comes to mind, where they're just not as effective the second time in a back-to-back situation.
I can't compete with you physically, and you're no match for my brains.
Anyway.
Clearly, Rocco playing some 4D chess, Dan, that I'm just not able to follow. I'm glad that you two are playing on the same board, because I am totally lost.
All right, let's go to the Minnesota moment.
Minnesota moment.
So I'll go first. I'm looking at the top 3 of Game 2. I think Eddie Julian getting thrown out at home was a bad sign. And it felt as I was listening to this game that the Blue Jays just weren't going away. And I will credit Atterbury and Molitor for talking about this on the radio cast, because, they were saying you cannot just let them wake up. And sure enough, they did. And so I think if they even have that one extra run, and it just feels psychologically a little bit different to have a lead a little bit later. And then for another moment, I think Funderburk's play in Game 3 to get out of that bases loaded jam without blowing the game open was so crucial, and it makes me think that maybe this is the changing of the guard, where we're going to see Funderburk get some of those and Thielbar's not.
I hate giving you credit, Dan, but you did call this a few episodes ago.
Well, I've been wrong before, but I'll take the victory here. Hopefully it's right, because if Funderburk can do that, they need a lefty. Okert can't shut anybody down, and Thielbar just doesn't look right.
Okert has never once looked well on the mound. Like, never once have I seen him throw a pitch and I'm like, that's a guy who should be pitching meaningful innings.
Right, exactly. What do you got?
Yeah, so Game 3, top 8. You pointed this out. So Julian steals second here in the top of the 8th, and this prevents a Larnach ground into double play, which I didn't really even connect. You texted that to me, Dan, when I was saying, oh man, how big that steal was from Julian. But then they walk Correa, and so now you have Correa at first, and you have Julian at third, and then who else, Dan? Max Kepler comes up in the clutch. Hits a double, which scores Julian from third, obviously, and then Correa, who had been walked. Now, Correa, Dan, they kept talking about this on the broadcast, saying look how great he looks running around those bases, running from first to home, full strides, no plantar fasciitis. Okay, there comes a point then where you have to stop talking about previous year's injuries, right? Like, I guess not with Buxton, because his are a constant, but like, it's one of those things where how often do we have to hear, like, they're not talking about Pablo Lopez's Tommy Johns from 13 years ago, are they?
No, they're not. Nor are they talking about the other injuries that Carlos Correa has had. The ankle that was the whole root of all of the failed signings by the Giants.
We call that the phantom ankle, Dan, is what we call that.
So, I mean, he didn't look great. he looked like he was huffing and puffing to get from third to home twice in this series. So he's just not very fleet. That's not one of his gifts. That's okay.
Far be it from me to criticize someone for running slowly, Dan. However, watching Vogelback make his way down to first base a couple of times this series was pretty fascinating. There was a play actually where he hit a grounder to Carlos Correa, and Correa sort of bobbled it. He was in no hurry, Dan, to pick up that ball and throw to first. He took his sweet time.
Oh, gosh. Well, we have more things to muse about here in our next segment.
I just don't know how it can get any better.
Mauer's Musings.
I'm going to sneak mine in here quick because it relates to a lot of the things that I've been talking about. And I saw this mentioned at least in comments on Twitter, so I'm not the only person thinking this, obviously. But could Louie Varland be the solution right now to the bullpen issues? Because there's been some spots where it's like, if you had somebody else who could throw 98, 99, 100 miles per hour, yeah, this might be kind of nice. And I'm sorry, Louie Varland, if you want to be a starting pitcher, well, then be a better starting pitcher. Like, you're a proven, maybe prove...
What? That's harsh, Dan.
Well,
that's something that I would say. That was harsh.
He had his chance, right? This is kind of like dinosaurs, right? In Jurassic Park where they had their chance, right? But nature selected them, right? Rocco selected him for Extinction to AAA. So I just think this is maybe his time to come back Jurassic Park style as a relief pitcher. This is falling apart, isn't it? This metaphor is falling apart.
Ogres are like onions. Ogres are like onions. End of story.
You tried to merge so many, you were really stuck on this dinosaur metaphor, which I don't know. Does Louie Varland really like dinosaurs? Like, why are you so stuck on dinosaurs?
No, he's like the dinosaur. Anyway, you haven't seen Jurassic Park as much as I have, David, clearly.
Well, I know the gist of it. To understand that metaphor made no sense, Dan.
Fair enough. Does that make sense, though, in the end? The simpler version that Varland could be a relief pitcher right now that would help the team?
Yes, I 100% agree with that sentiment. I think having another guy who could be big in those 7, 8, and 9 innings would be fantastic. I don't know how those conversations go. Like, can the player flat out refuse and just say, no, I'm a starter, and then they cut bait with them? I don't know how that works with contracts and whatnot. Like, are you signed as a starter? Or, like, are you signed as you can go either way? I don't know how it all works.
I just think that'd be super short-sighted of Louie Varland here. He's got a spot. He can be a great relief pitcher, and maybe the Twins will have some other starting pitching options here as guys like Festa kind of get worked back up. Anyway, David, you have a different question, different direction.
So I was working on getting a Puckett's pick, Stan, and it's turned out to be a little bit more difficult than it has been in seasons past, where I can just reach out to a random fan and they give me a quick I am back. No, Dan, what's happening now is every time I send a note, they're like, well, I haven't really been following the team because I can't watch them, Dan. Mm-hmm. My question, Dan, will Twins fans ever be able to watch this team again? And let me just say, I'm watching all the games because I have DirecTV. The only reason I switched to DirecTV, CenturyLink started to offer fiber in my neighborhood. Only reason I switched, otherwise I'd still be with Comcast. Dan, if I was a Comcast subscriber and they took away the Twins from me, I would be on the phone constantly. I would tell them, I will cancel your service unless you give it to me for free. Because there's no point in having it. The main reason we have cable of any kind is so I can watch the Twins and the Wild and the Wolves. And if that's not available on the channel, why would I have this? I can't understand. The Twins need to recognize that they have made a major mistake. And the primary way that people are going to enjoy your product is via television. And you couldn't figure it out. You couldn't see the writing on the wall that there would be complications with getting your product out to subscribers, knowing how bad it's been the seasons past. Like, again, you've mentioned this before, Dan, 30 teams are blacked out in Iowa, like, because the MLB can't get their act together. I don't understand how MLB can't step in, especially in this instance where mid-season, the rights to a team streaming are removed. Like, Twins fans want to watch this team. And it was hilarious because on every single social media post where they're like, oh, the streak continues when they hit like 11 games. And that's like exactly when Comcast cut the cord. And it's like, everybody's so ticked. They're like, oh man, it would have been really great to watch. I don't understand, Dan. What is the thought process of the Comcast execs? But more so, Dan, what's the thought process of the Twins front office when they signed this deal to begin with?
It's just short-sightedness. And baseball as an entity has a problem with this. You kind of alluded to that, where I think there's a number of teams in this position. The Diamondbacks did the right thing where they just they owned it themselves, right? They just kind of took over. That's what I wish the Twins would have done. It would get a whole lot more buy-in for ownership at that point too, because you're just angering people in your core fan base. And that seems really silly that I, who live 4 states away, can watch all the games that I want. But if I were back in Minnesota, I couldn't. It is poor from a business standpoint as well. And you would think that a guy like Manfred, who's made a lot of good decisions for baseball, would be able to figure this out. So hopefully this is next on his list, because I think this is maybe the most important thing facing baseball right now.
But honestly, the question still remains, do you think they're going to resolve this at any point this season, or is this just a lost season at this point?
You'd think they'd have to fix it at some point, right? Like they're going to come to some contractual agreement. They have to.
I mean, the longer it goes on, the more I think that no, this is how it's going to be for this season.
Well, the Twins management team has been pretty aloof, I suppose, from the fan base and for a lot of other reasons. So I guess it wouldn't surprise me either if that's how it went.
All right, well, let's go on here, Dan. Series grades time.
Series grades.
So I'm going to give them a B, Dan. I mean, they kept the streak of winning series alive. I would think, though, in Game 2, 8 runs should be enough to win you Game 2. And I know that your perspective is Rocco was managing to win Game 3, so why worry about Game 2? I think that's a crazy perspective, personally. But I'm going to give them a B. I hope they keep winning. And honestly, if they can take 2 of 3 against the Yankees, I am on board with this team, Dan. I mean, I'm already on board, but I'm even more on board, Dan.
Yeah, I went with a 9 out of 10 for advanced retreat because they won a road series against what I think is probably going to be an above 500 team at the end of the year. But they do have major bullpen issues with, I would say, 3 of those guys for sure. The guys that we saw in Game 2, because it's not just a now issue. I mean, you have multiple guys with ERAs over 6, and it's mid-May. Well-played baseball, I don't know that maybe my 9 out of 10 is maybe all that fair. They had really timely hitting that I think overshadows some of the other issues that they had. Game 2 was obviously a train wreck from a bullpen standpoint, and they had no hitting in Game 2 really after the beginning, but they had also scored 8 runs already. So it's hard to kind of say, well, we needed more bats. So I guess I still gave them a 9 out of 10 because there were a lot of things that they did well. They played pretty well in the field. But again, that's an A-, and I feel like that's probably is too high.
I do wonder, Dan, you said you'd be willing to tweak the grade a little bit, Dan. I do wonder if for well-played baseball, if you split it 5 points for defense and 5 points for offense, might be a little bit better, because it does seem as though you sort of end up on one of the two extremes. Like if they hit really well, you're like, oh, 10 out of 10, this is great.
Sure.
Or if they make 2 errors, you're like 1 out of 10. What is this, rookie ball? So I do think maybe making a split here might make the grade all the more accurate.
You know what I could do, actually? I could go back to a 5-point, 5-tool baseball approach.
I knew I shouldn't
and
have
then
said
each
anything.
one gets 2 points.
I'm sorry,
and then
folks,
I can use
this was a
fractional
mistake.
points.
This
that
was
would be
such
fantastic.
I don't know why I bother. It's just it's beyond me. I don't understand how my brain can't tell my mouth to not say things sometimes, Dan.
Anyway, a couple things to talk about here, looking around the league at Herbie's headline.
I don't know, Jack. It looked like Herbeck pulled him off the bag.
Herbie's headlines.
Just a quick note here, Dan. De La Cruz has 25 stolen bases, which is more than the total of half the teams in the league, Dan, which is just insane when you think about it that way.
I saw a note earlier that they thought he might be the first 40-90 player in Major League Baseball with 40 home runs and 90 steals. Really remarkable. Ellie De La Cruz, what a fun player to watch. Do they come here this year?
Yeah, they're here in September, actually. So if you want to see that man run the bases, that's going to be the time to catch him at Target Field.
Well, and then another NL Central note, Paul Skeens, who was the first overall pick for the Pirates, had his debut. Now, he was okay. I think he only went 4 innings. There was a rain delay. He gave up some runs. It wasn't a perfect situation for him. But in the first at-bat that he faced a batter, he threw 5 100-mile-an-hour fastballs. Like, what a debut, but I worry about a starter trying to throw 100 like that. Like, that seems like a Tommy John surgery waiting to happen, doesn't it?
Yeah, I do think that there's obviously a whole bunch of adrenaline making that first start. You think he'll probably calm down a little bit. But yeah, I don't know that there's anybody who's going to consistently throw 100 miles an hour to be able to go, 6 innings, for crying out loud.
All right, on here to the Yankees series. It's time for Puckett's Picks.
And we'll see you tomorrow night.
Puckett's Picks.
The listeners are going to take Santana. Hogs is then going to take Kepler off the board. And I do want to note, the listener pick was from a listener who's also a mom for Mother's Day.
Excellent. That's a great choice. I am then next. What the heck? Let's stick with Eddie Julian because, there's that short, isn't there a short porch in right?
Yeah, there's a short porch in right.
So that's what I'm going to go with. So I'll stick with Eddie Julian. Why not?
You realize that he's hit like all of his home runs to left field though, right?
Well, there's a wall over there too. He can hit home runs that way. But yes,
maybe most stadiums have walls all the way around the outfield. Good.
Except for Baltimore. Baltimore has that weird corner, right, where there's like a right turn in left field. It's very confusing.
They're still made of walls, Dan. I hate to break it to you.
All right, Julian it is for me. Who are you going to take?
Man, I feel like Jeffers makes the most sense, but I got to stick with Correa. He won for me. This is a turnaround. It's redemption from last season where I'd pick him and he'd fail, and I'd pick him and he'd fail, and I'd pick him and he'd fail. I picked him and he won, Dan. I'm on board. I'm going to stick with my boy Carlos.
Yeah, and this series is back in Minnesota, so kind of a weird 3-day trip to Canada. Then the Twins are back after an off day, and then they go to Cleveland, to Washington. They'll see the Yankees again in June, so I'm looking forward to this. And, I get to watch them play Aaron Judge, one of my all-time favorites.
One of your all-time favorites, Dan.
All rise for Dan's Judge Love.
We don't get to use that sounder all the time, so I feel like I got to kind of sneak it in whenever I can.
Indeed. Why don't you go ahead and send us off, Dan?
Well, folks, if you like what you hear, please tell a friend. You can follow us on X at Min for the Win. You can find our Min for the Win Facebook page and Instagram pages. Make sure you're subscribed to the podcast on your favorite platforms so you're notified when new episodes are available. And if you could leave us a rating or a like, we'd greatly appreciate it. If you'd like to support the show further, you can find us on Patreon. There's a link in the description. You can also leave us a comment as well. Thanks for listening, and as always, go Twins.
That'll wrap up another episode of Men for the Win, a podcast hosted by David Kufis and Dan Thompson, two avid fans who appreciate well-played baseball, especially when it's done by the Twins. Thanks so much for listening, and as always, go Twins.